Welcome back to Wish I Knew, the podcast where we talk about how to build a life and career that you truly love. Today's episode is all about confidence, identity, and how to actually become the best version of yourself. I'm joined by Izzy Utterson, a content creator, mindset coach, and the queen of glow-ups. In this episode, we talk about how to build real confidence, how to stay consistent when motivation drops, and how to build lasting habits that actually stick so that you can actually become the best version of yourself. If you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but you're not quite where you need to be yet, this episode's for you. So let's get into it. Izzy, welcome to Wish I Knew. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I have been obsessed with your content for so long. I feel like everyone probably must say that to you. Dandelion root tea is a staple in my cupboards now, thanks to you. But what I love is that your content comes from a place of genuine experience and learnings from yourself versus motivational, kind of aspirational, wishy-washy content, you know? And so in context of the audience and the show, we talk a lot about bold, big pivots, people changing big areas of their lives, like their careers or their marriage or having children, not having children. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough is actually building up our confidence and having the confidence to take those big steps. So this episode, personally, I think is really important. And I just know everyone's going to love it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's dive in. The first question that we ask everyone is a bit of a reflective question.
Yes.
What do you wish you could tell your younger self?
It's such a great question. And actually, this is the question, I know it's the first question, but it's the one I was really reflecting on the most, because I think when you think about what would I tell my younger self, there's a million and one different things you go through, right? Gosh, I never would do that again. And I, wouldn't have been in that relationship, and I wouldn't have said yes to that, and I wouldn't have taken that job. But then also, I'm so happy and grateful to where I am now. So I think there's two sides to it, where I think I would probably tell myself to worry a little bit less. But I also think in the same breath that worrying and, as we were speaking about before we were recording, that sort of need to hustle, that need to work, and that sort of need to sort of be everywhere and do everything is what's got me to where I am today. So I think, would I tell my younger self anything? Probably not, because I'm really happy. All of the failures, if you can call them that, all of the sort of happy accidents, all of the missteps, if they are missteps, I always say there's no such thing as misdirection, only redirection. Every single path taken has got me to where I am now, and I wouldn't change a thing about where I am now. So I don't think I would tell my younger self anything, to be honest.
I love that response. Yeah. We've never had that response.
Yeah, I don't think I would.
But I think you're so right in the sense of viewing every blessing in disguise, or, every rejection or no or thing that didn't work out eventually leads you to something on your path.
Absolutely. And I think about, I think specifically in career and within my relationship, I think all of the bad moves in both are what's led me to the relationship I'm in today, which I wouldn't change for the world, to the career that I'm in today, which is beyond my wildest dreams that I ever could have imagined. And I think every, on paper, bad thing, quote unquote, that's happened has led me to everything now. So yeah, don't think I would tell her anything. I would just sort of be like, keep going.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And so from a career sense, we were just talking about sort of early careers and very much leaning into the Devil Wears Prada era, which is obviously having a bit of a comeback at the moment as well, which I love. How did you start building such a cult community online about glow ups? I mean, it's crazy to say as well, because you are just known for the term glow up, even though it's like a term that's been around for quite a long time.
Yeah, it's a kind of tale as old as time. I think the answer to that question is it was very accidental. And I think, as with anything, I've got a couple of projects I'm working on at the moment, and I always say, the name will come to us, or the concept will come to us. Like, don't worry, it will come. And the glow up came out of nowhere. I don't really know where it came. Obviously, it's a phrase that's been around for as long as whatever. But to me, I think it really was more than that physical change. It was like glowing up in all areas of your life. I think, there's always been the concept of the makeover, the reinvention, the glow up, all of those things. And it felt really relevant to my life, that kind of inside out glow, that feeling good, looking good. And I was just having a conversation with someone this morning about, I said, it's not, the physical glow up is a byproduct of what's going on inside. If you feel good, if you're confident, if you're taking care of your mind, of your body, you'll look good because you feel good. And it's that kind of circular thing. So I think I can't tell you exactly where it came from, but what I know is when I started posting, I'd worked in social media management and strategy for a few years. And I'd worked at some of the top global brands in beauty and fashion and skincare. And I was sort of obsessed with the metrics, purely from the perspective of it was a signpost that I was good at my job. And I was always a bit of a sort of teacher's pet when it came to work. I was like metrics obsessed and driven when you have to be when you work for a brand. You have KPIs, you have goals, there are things you have to do. Like, that, I know that. And I think it was no different to my own social media. I think I sort of started to notice what people's pain points were. And I started to, talk to something I think definitely had been spoken about before, but just maybe not within my community that I was reaching. And it was that thing of, this is what, these are the tangible, free, or at least incredibly inexpensive things that I do to feel my best and as a byproduct, look my best. And this is how I completely 180'd my life, because no one came into my life and said, here's an opportunity, here's some money, here's some this. Like, no one came in and said that. It was very much, okay, I need to fix what's going on up here and the rest will fall into place. And it did. And it was just speaking from genuinely my own voice of what I'd done, what had actually worked for me, because I tried everything. I went to full moon manifesting rituals where I would burn things under the full moon and, put my crystals under, I tried it all. I did every cleanse, every workout, every diet, every, training program, all these quick fixes that you're promised through the wellness industry. I tried them all and I tried them all and failed. For years, I was stuck in that cycle of all or nothing within my life. It had to be doing the absolute most. And because of that sort of, it wasn't sustainable. So I think sustainability and accessibility has always been at the core of what I do. What can you do that's actually going to make a difference? What can you do that you can do every day? And what can you do that you can do for free or inexpensively? And so that was what I started speaking about. But I didn't have the goal of building an online presence. I just quite enjoyed when the videos hit a lot of people because I was like, amazing, this is going to help lots of people. That kind of metrics driven side of my brain was sort of thinking about that. I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would become a creator. That wasn't even an option. It was kind of this thing of, nice, like I've got my 9-to-5 job and I love my 9-to-5 job, but I also have this other thing I do, which I get home from work and I film till 9 o'clock, then I edit, then I post, then I go to bed, then I wake up, then I do the same thing. And I just share this sort of not super aesthetic life, of what I'm doing that could, work for everybody, or at least, as many people as I could reach. And I think it just sort of organically grew. People started to take notice of it. And, I built this wonderful, incredible community. And I'm seeing the fruits of that more and more to where, I've been on this journey for 2.5 years now. And I have largely women, I guess, reaching out to me of all ages. I have women in their 70s, women in their 60s, women in their 20s, saying to me, you've changed my life, or this tip you gave me really helped me to do this, or I've started my business, or whatever it is. So I think only now am I really seeing the fruits of that, because like I say, I'm not selling anything.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly not selling a quick fix. So I think, to answer your point in a very sort of roundabout way, I think it was just staying true to what I believe. Yeah. I really believe that you can change your life in a sustainable way by sort of changing your mindset and changing your daily habits. It's not selling anything. There's no promise of a quick fix that's then going to sort of, promise you the world and then fall off. It just, we're all on this journey together. And it's, you have to show up every day and do it. So I think that's probably why. But the glow up, I don't even know where that came from. It's like, it was the weirdest thing. I sort of just said it one day in a video, and I think, that was the July. And by the September, I'd amassed over 100,000 followers on TikTok.
Wow.
Up from 30,000. So it was like a 70,000 growth within the space of 2 months. And I kind of thought, okay, there might be something to this.
In that.
Yeah.
And then repeating that format. It's so smart.
And then repeating that format because I think in social media, I think there's this need to reinvent the wheel constantly. But I think staying true to your message, okay, some people might be like, oh, I've heard that, but you might be reaching new audiences. And you're also just reminding it's like, there's not always something new to say because sometimes what I said is, that's still important and that's still relevant.
Absolutely. And I think, I resonated with so much that you were talking about there, the sense of the quick fixes. And immediately in my mind, I'm thinking of the days where we had like skinny teas and waist trainers.
Skinny coffee.
Yeah. I've had all of that. Yeah. Also, I feel like we're probably similar age, but like we grew up in the era.
The Tumblr era.
But also like all the fad diets, all the shakes, the Slimming Worlds. Special K diet.
Yeah.
All of this sort of stuff. And not even on a weight perspective, but I feel like we've now also entered this era of like people thinking that a lot of these really expensive fixes are normal. So we're in this Kardashian era, and I love the Kardashians. I love watching the show.
Love them.
Love Kris Jenner, Momager. But, the obsession we have over Kris Jenner's facelift or Lindsay Lohan's facelift, people are thinking that, and Kris Jenner's in her 70s, she's not a 25-year-old, but people are expecting, and I think it's just giving people an unrealistic expectation of what looking good actually takes or is for people, for the average person. And I think that what really sung true as you were speaking just then, and also through your content, is the relatability. And you were talking about the girl that's getting up and doing her 9 to 5 and then coming home and filming content, that you're reaching so many people because you're speaking to them like you're one of them, right?
Yeah, and I think that's, I think there are unrealistic beauty expectations have always been there. I've had a couple of times, I think people have sort of, and I always want to say with the glow up, it's the physical, the looking good, I suppose, is a byproduct of taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
The feeling good and the thinking good has to come first. But I think we're sold the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I was trying to do for such a long time, was to sort of aesthetically reach a goal and think that was going to fix my mind.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true. I was just sort of doing it the wrong way around for a very long time.
Yeah, which I think most of us probably were, right?
Yeah.
And so going back to your journey, you talk about confidence a lot. What did that look like before? And I guess what was that shift for you?
I think I was always confident. I was always confident in what I was good at, but I wasn't self-confident. So confidence and self-confidence are very different things. We can be very confident within our skills as a worker, or that might be a hobby that we have, or that might be we're a very good conversationalist, might be you're a very good public speaker. I was, the latter. I was a very good public speaker. When it came to things like giving a presentation at work, I was very confident in that. There was no fear of public speaking because confidence is a skill. It's like a muscle. You have to nourish it. And growing up, I was incredibly shy because I had no self-confidence. I always, I had body image issues for as long as I can remember. There was sort of a few nasty comments at school when I was younger. And then, you sort of navigate that, when I was really young, like 7 or 8 years old, this is the sort of first time I can remember being aware of that. But I was very confident I did acting, I did debating, I did singing, I was always on stage. So the confidence, the skill of public speaking and the confidence within public speaking was something that, my parents allowed me to nurture, and I nurtured and I loved, and it made me come alive. But when I was in a social situation, or, seeing a family member, I was cripplingly shy. And that self-confidence is what was really lacking. And that carried through probably to my mid-20s, to be honest with you. It was this sort of feeling of social anxiety, I suppose, but that translated through to my self-confidence, or rather lack thereof. I speak about maybe 6-7 years ago, I was diagnosed with psoriasis when I was 21, so 8 years ago. And it was one of the worst cases my doctor had ever seen. So it was covering me from sort of neck to toe. I was completely covered on my scalp. So my face was the only thing that wasn't affected by it. And I think as a young woman in my early 20s, navigating that was really tricky. And I gained a lot of weight. And, I just felt very badly about myself. And I didn't look in the mirror for 2 years. That was how lacking in self-confidence I was. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, the self-confidence didn't exist, but the confidence was there in what I was good at. I just had to figure out a way that I could sort of
bridge the two,
bridge the two and sort of translate that into my day-to-day life, because you don't really get to do public speaking in a 9-to-5 corporate job, or at least I didn't really, maybe when I got to give a presentation or something like that, I was like, yes, nice. Like I get to sort of scratch that itch and do the thing that really makes me feel confident. So I think it is a skill. You have to put yourself in situations that make you feel really uncomfortable. I had to put myself in situations like walking into rooms where I didn't know anyone, or coming on podcasts, or, just putting myself out there in a way that I never really had to do before, because that self-confidence is a muscle. The more you do it, the more natural it is going to feel. I didn't have that at all. But the more that I practiced it, the more that I showed up, the more that I sort of embodied that confidence by just showing up and sort of told my brain, we're good. We're safe. Because a lot of the lack of confidence comes from a fear of the unknown. Your brain doesn't know the difference between good and bad. It knows need, and it needs to do what you've always done. So if what you've always done is stayed within your comfort zone, it thinks, okay, well, that's always kept us alive. That's always kept us safe. We're going to keep doing that. So when it comes to opportunities that you think, gosh, no, I'm too nervous for that. I'm not, I'm not confident enough, or whatever it might be, you've got to push through that, because that's where growth's going to happen. That's where neurological rewiring is going to happen. That's where that confidence is going to be built. People say, so-and-so's so confident. And it's like, you're not born confident.
Yeah.
It truly, it's a learned skill. Yes, there are things that people are going to be sort of naturally more talented at. And that's what I always say, with public speaking, with being on stage. I said, I was the most cripplingly shy person, and I could still do that because I loved it. That truly, I believe, is my calling within life, is to do that. But that self-confidence came later, and that was something that I had to build and work on and develop.
And it's so interesting because when you talk about acting, public speaking, there's this element of like pretend almost, or like fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
And when people talk about confidence a lot, I think a lot of people do associate that with faking it till you make it, of pretending you're confident until you are. And I think
I'll just caveat that. I used to think that. I don't anymore. I think, and the example I use is, think about the greatest actor that you can think of in an amazing role. Let's stay on the Devil Wears Prada. Let's think about Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada, right? That's not pretending. You believe she is that. Do you know what I mean? There's a difference, I think, between a good actor and a great actor. Is an actor that looks like they're acting, that looks like they're pretending, isn't a very good actor. An actor who becomes the role, who embodies that role, is a great actor. To where we're sat watching the film and we genuinely believe it's that person. Think about like the cast of Friends, you know? Like if we see them in anything else, we're sort of like, but that's Rachel or that's Ross or whatever it is. And I think the same is true. It's not about faking it till you make it necessarily, though you're on the right path. You have to really embody that. And I always say to people, and I always say to my clients, and when I give talks, I say, think about the person that you most admire, whether that's qualities, whether that's the position they're in. Embody that person, until you naturally become that person. But the faking it thing, I think, we've always been told that fake it till you make it. And I definitely think it's on the right path. I think we just need to switch the language slightly, because fake it till you make it implies and tells our brain we're pretending.
Yeah.
Where when you embody, you put your shoulders back, your head held high, you think, I am that person.
You become.
Yeah. So it's just a slight language change.
I think you're right. And fake it till you make it also probably implies that you're an imposter. And
Exactly.
then you get to a point, and I felt like this with my career in some regards, of like, fake it till you make it, fake it till you make it. I'm just going to pretend I'm really confident. I'm going to pretend I'm this. And I'd say it did help me become.
Yes.
But then at some points, you would then think, oh no, I've faked it to the top, you know, which isn't true.
100%. And by the way, I had this. And I know so many people, oh God, you know, it's that universal thing we have of, I'm going to be found out, you know, like, you know, because I've sort of like somehow got here and done that. So I think you just have to embody, you just have to step into, you just have to become. And more than anything else, our brain is always listening to our thoughts, to what we say, to what we do. And it doesn't differentiate between true and not true. It knows repeated. So if you're repeatedly saying, I'm faking it till I make it, or, you know, whatever it is, it's listening and it's knowing and it's embedding that within your mind. So when that sort of fear and anxiety and imposter syndrome feeling comes out, you think, okay, well, what have I been feeding it to sort of, for it to come to that conclusion? Where when you decide to embody, you start using, you know, linguistically, you start saying, I am confident, you know, I am deserving, I am worthy through those affirmations. And they don't, you know, affirmations don't have to be, I think everybody thinks it's incredibly woo-woo. And this is why I'm doing my neuroscience degree, because I'm like, no, there's so much power within this for your brain. Just speaking those things and starting to think them and starting to embody them will shift the whole way that you carry yourself to where that little voice of, you don't deserve to be, you know, it's not going to come out so much because your body's not in protection mode. It's not in that kind of threat mode of, but you've told us that we're pretending. So the fact that we're here now, we're really nervous and we're thinking, actually, I'm not prepared for this because you've told us we're pretending. Whereas if you tell it, no, I am this, it has no choice but to listen.
Yeah. And so if someone is listening to this and they're maybe lacking confidence or feeling like they've lost their confidence or lost their way, where would be the first place to start?
Self-talk, how you speak to yourself. It begins and ends in your mind. I think we tend to speak to ourselves and about ourselves, and that sort of falls into our self-concepts in really mean ways. And I do a weekly Q&A on Instagram, and I had a question come in on Sunday, which was, this woman messaged me and said, she basically was sort of saying, you know, the language she was using was, I'm disgusting, I'm, you know, I look horrible, I look this, and it really hit me in a kind of painful way because I'd used those exact words to describe myself. I remember thinking like, I'm disgusting, I look disgusting, no one wants me here, no one wants that. And the funny thing about your brain is it is always listening and it knows repeated, and what you repeatedly tell it, it will scan for things in your life that back it up. So it will scan for relevant bits of information that prove that to be true. So if you're telling yourself, I'm not worthy of this, you're going to scan for relevance of things that prove that to be true. So when your boss says something to you that's maybe constructive criticism, the way that you interpret that is going to be very different if you're coming from a good place. If someone gives you a bit of a funny look, maybe they're not even giving you a funny look, maybe they like have something in their eye. But because of where you're at, you're going to interpret it in that different way. It's like on the days that you have spoken really kindly to yourself, on the days that you wake up just in such a good mood, the sun is shining, everything's like that, you might still sort of trip up walking down the street, but it's not going to impact you in the same way as if you're coming from a really negative headspace. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, your brain can only be aware of 40 things at once, roughly. And there's a lot going on in your subconscious mind in the background all the time. Your subconscious mind is what's in control of digestion, breathing, all the things you actually don't have to actively think about, as well as lots of other thoughts. It's around 95% of our thinking. But what consciously filters through from the subconscious to the conscious mind, let's say you can be aware of roughly 40 things at once, your brain is going to filter out irrelevant things. Now, what makes something relevant? I always say to people, think about, you know, if you or your partner or your parent or a friend has bought a car, suddenly everybody has that car. It's not that suddenly everybody has that car. That car is just suddenly relevant to you. It's suddenly within your periphery. My mindset coach who trained me always talks about when she got pregnant, she left the house one day and a baby store had opened opposite her house. She's like, oh my God, how convenient. It had been there for 15 years. It had just never been relevant to her to notice that before. And once you start to become aware of this, you start to notice it everywhere. It's what's known as confirmation bias. And it's sort of a little bit why, you know, maybe you think about someone, and there's probably a lot more to this, but you think about someone or you speak about someone and suddenly they text you or you bump into them on the street, you know, you just, and it sort of feels like, oh my God, how did that happen? Or And this is why I always say to people to talk about what you want to do. Talk to people about what you want to do. Like, hey, Emily, I want to, there's this opportunity. I would love to do that. And then you might have a meeting with someone where you say, and they say, I've got this opportunity. And you think, oh my God, Izzy wants to do, Izzy wants to do that. You greatly increase your surface area for luck and opportunity if you talk about things, if you're sort of open to them. So I think the first thing, if you have lost your way for self-confidence, is start to speak to yourself a little bit more kindly. Start to listen to those affirmations in the morning. The first 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes before you go to bed. Your brain is in alpha theta, which means it's the most susceptible to new information. So the first thing you're doing is getting on your phone and kind of scrolling and seeing things that make you feel badly about yourself, or you're comparing, or you're just reading things that make you feel sad or angry, and it's important for us to educate ourselves. But protecting that first and last 5 minutes is really powerful, because that's when your subconscious mind is the most susceptible to information. So if you use that time to say, okay, no, I'm worthy, I'm powerful, I've got this, whatever the affirmation that's relevant to you is, and the last 5 minutes before, just as you're in bed falling asleep, we all have that time. If you can use that time to do that, or while you're brushing your teeth or doing your skincare or whatever it is, that's why I always say to people, just like listen to a playlist. If you can do that, you slowly start to rewire that self-concept within your subconscious mind, and that starts to filter through into your reality. So you'll start to notice things that agree with those positive affirmations. So opportunities are going to start coming. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're saying, I want to join a run club, but I don't know where to do it. Then that information is going to come. You're going to notice it. And all of these little things are going to start happening, or you'll pick up on a conversation, or you'll have a conversation with someone. It's like I always say, if you're looking to find your dream partner, you need to get very clear about what that person looks like. Because if you're very clear about what that person looks like, and then they're stood next to you at the bus stop or at the bar or at a party or whatever it is, you're thinking, oh my God, it's you.
Yeah.
But if you're not clear on that, you're not going to notice it. So you need to be very clear about your self-concept, about who you are. And then the information will start to be filtered out based on that. So I think that confidence, that feeling good, that stepping into opportunity begins and ends in your mind, how you're speaking to and about yourself. And the second thing is to speak about what it is that you want, to share that with the people around you, because you never know what opportunities somebody else might be being told that if they don't know you want to do that, they're not going to put you up for it. You greatly increase your opportunities, your luck, your situation, if you just start to talk about what it is that you want to do, because you're increasing that surface area. You're kind of saying, okay, this is, where my passion lies. This is what I want to do. When I started doing this job, not a lot of people are doing public speaking within this role of content creation. I didn't see a lot of that happening. So I was like, anyone that I spoke to, anyone I met, I was like, well, I do public speaking. So if ever you have any talking opportunities, please let me know. And they say, oh, I didn't know you did that, and then it starts to happen, or they'll see you doing it and they'll say, oh, I didn't know you did that, and the opportunity starts to come. But it wasn't, you can't wait for things to come to you. You kind of have to make it, within your mind, getting clear about who I am, what do I want, and then speaking it out there.
And I think that, so much of that rings so true. And I think a lot of it also comes from like the belief, like you said, the self-belief that you deserve those things.
Totally. And I think I sometimes, it's not that I ever think, I don't deserve it. It's not necessarily that thought. I guess sometimes you sort of think, why do I get to do this and someone else doesn't? And I think if you thought about that, you could go a bit mad, because you could sort of ruminate on that forever. But better to try.
Yeah.
Better to put it out there, better to try.
What's the worst that can happen? One thing I didn't fully appreciate before running my own business was just how much mental energy everyday decisions take. When you're spinning a lot of different plates and always thinking a few steps ahead, even the small things can start to feel surprisingly draining. After leaving corporate to set up my business last year, I realized if I wanted to stay focused and make good decisions consistently, I needed to simplify wherever I could, especially when it came to my health. When it comes to supplements though, I've always really struggled with consistency, mostly because I felt so overwhelmed by having to take so many different ones. That's why I've been using Heights Vitals as part of my new daily routine. I wake up, get ready, take 2 capsules, and that's literally it. Vitals combines 20 essential vitamins, nutrients, and minerals, which would normally mean taking around 14 different supplements, but it's all in one simple formula, supporting both your brain and your body health. For me, it's helped me to stay focused on long days, keep my energy nice and steady throughout the week, and it's massively improved my sleep, which makes a real difference to how I think and show up every day. I also really value how flexible it is. You can take it with or without food, and at any time of day, which really matters when your routine isn't always predictable. Even if I forget it in the morning, I know I can still take it later and stay consistent. And you don't just have to take my word for it. Vitals is backed by hundreds of scientific studies and has been developed alongside leading experts. So if you're looking for a simple way to support your focus, energy, and overall health as you work towards your own goals, you can check out Heights in the link below in the show notes. And you can use the code WishIKnew20 for 20% off in your first month. That's WishIKnew20 for 20% off your first month. I hope you love it just as much as I do. It's so interesting when you're talking about like the simple things, like someone giving you a look. And I feel like so many people listening to this will relate to that, of like sometimes our brains just immediately think the negative.
Yep.
So for example, I've been working with this brand more recently, like directly through the brand. And then they've appointed a new agency, and my immediate thought, I think I was in quite a negative headspace on this particular day. My immediate thought was, oh no, the agency won't want to work with me. And the reality is I've had amazing chats with them. The founder of the agency is like, let's grab coffee. I've got other clients I'd love to introduce you to. We could work together on this. And I thought, oh, actually, it's not always the worst case scenario. It's not always the negative. Actually, things can be really positive and people can have really positive outcomes.
Totally.
Just the smallest things, or like you say, someone looking at you on the thing and on the street or on the tube. And I've had it before and I've been like, oh, they're giving me a dirty look or whatever. And then they come up and ask where your jacket's from.
And by the way, I'm so glad you said that, because I always do that. I compliment a stranger every day, like usually more than once.
Mm-hmm.
Your skin is so glowy, or where is that from? Or, anything like that. And what you said about, looking for that negative, our brains are hardwired to scan for threat. Our brains have not evolved all that much to keep up with modern living. So our brains actually are hardwired to look for threat. So it'll be, you're having a really brilliant day, and I had this recently. I had the best week ever on paper, career-wise. It was kind of like, oh my goodness, how is all of this happening? This is so amazing. Then I had this sort of crash, and I'm sort of like, it's all too good. When's the penny going to drop? Or, touch wood. But your brain starts to scan for threat because it sort of feels too safe, and we're hardwired to scan for threat. And that's why, that thing that was going around on social media about a year ago that sort of said, why does my brain think I'm being chased by a tiger when my boss has just sent me an email? It's because that adrenaline, that fight or flight that we're kind of finding ourselves in, was a very important thing actually that we needed biologically back when being chased by a tiger was a very real threat. But that fear kind of comes up for us still, that fear, that scanning for threat, that sort of need to keep us safe, because ultimately your brain's doing its job. It's trying to keep you alive, right? And I think the knowledge that A, my brain is working for me by doing that, but B, that's just my brain trying to find threat. That's my brain trying to find something to focus on, because when we're in that rest and digest, that calm, it can kind of peter over. I'm actually reading a book right now called Addicted to Anxiety.
I saw that the other day. Yeah.
Very relevant. A girlfriend of mine sent it to me. She was like, Izzy, this is the best book. I was like, it really is. Because I just have felt a little bit out of whack in ways. And I think I wrote a Substack article about this, about why being bored is actually really a good thing for your brain, for your body, for your stress levels, for your nervous system. We're so addicted to the highs and that feeling. We say like, we don't want to feel that, but we're kind of addicted to that rush, to that adrenaline in a way. That's sort of like, what's next? And, the high. And then it's about finding the balance. And, Emma Grede talks about it. She says, there's the amazing times and the really bad times, and you're so laser focused in those times that when you're in that mid time, you know, that boring time where everything's just like good, you know, okay, not especially high, not especially, like just, you know, it's okay, like everything's ticking on, I'm like, I'm in a good place. Your brain's starting to go, well, hang on a minute, you know, what can we focus on? Because we've become so addicted to those other things that it's kind of thinking what's going on, that those boring times almost feel lower than the lows, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm learning about and trying to figure out.
It's so true. And I think I think it's maybe a societal like fault, you know, we're so addicted. And I actually read a really good book recently called Dose. I don't know if you've read this one.
Yes. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins.
Endorphins,
yes.
That's it.
Is that TJ Power?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'll double check.
Dose, is it the dose effect?
Yeah, maybe it's the dose effect.
I think, my fiance's just read it. I haven't actually read it, but I'm sort of, it's on the list of things to read.
Well, that opened my mind up so much because it talks about a lot of the stuff that you speak about in the sense of the our sort of primal instincts,
yes,
and keeping us safe and those types of things. But dopamine was really interesting because it spoke about the fact that like we're addicted to the quick hits of dopamine. So social media, opening your phone, and it's why like you open your phone and you've got nothing to look at, and you'll just by default go to Instagram or TikTok or whatever your platform of choice is. But those quick highs almost have like worse crashes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas things like going out, and so it was, you know, comparing it to when you would go and hunt for your food, you would get a dopamine hit, you know, or maybe not hit, but you would release dopamine, but over a sort of more gradual period of time, because you're going and working for something and then bringing it back and eating it. And that basically creates this more sustainable sort of daily feeling of happiness or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so that was really interesting because I'd never heard someone explain in kind of modern day terms the fact that, yeah, we all know social media is not great for us and all that sort of stuff, and we should put our phone away and go for walks and things like that. But the way that social media and dopamine actually interact with one another, and it is why you feel worse afterwards.
Mm-hmm. It is, because I think you're getting that quick hit, but then you're kind of crashing back down a little bit. But I think it's hard. I think sometimes the dopamine hit you get from doing other things is never going to feel as like a rush, you know? And I think for some people that rush is what they really, you know, what they really want, what they're looking for. So I think being okay with being bored, quote unquote, is really important, because it gives your brain a chance to sort of regroup. And when I say being bored, I don't mean sat on your sofa, kind of dopamine stacking with the TV and the phone. And, you know, I don't even mean listening to a podcast. I don't even mean listening to music. I mean like pure sat in silence or going for a walk and just getting around nature. And I know it sounds, again, I'm not telling you to sort of go out and get barefoot and, you know, get
trees.
That's, you know, I'm not telling you to do that. If you want to do that, absolutely do that. I live in London, so it's like not really possible. I'm like still on the concrete. But I think being able to just, even for sort of 10 minutes a day, be just with your thoughts, it gives your brain a chance to sort of get back into the default mode. And it gives your chance, the brain to sort of imagine it a little bit like just sort of tidying itself up a bit, organizing thoughts, organizing memories, sort of consolidating those things in the background while you're just sitting. But I think a reason that we don't like to do that is because our brain does tend to scan for threats. It does tend to go to worst case scenario with whatever it might be. You know, it gives you that time to really sit and think about things, which we don't always want to do. You know, there's not always great things that we have to think about, but it is very important nonetheless to do it. But it's not, you know, that instant gratification that you're going to get from social media or eating something or drinking, you know, whatever. It's not the same thing. So I think we've become a little bit addicted to, you know, we have become a little bit addicted to that. I think we're all probably guilty of that, you know, wanting that instant gratification.
There was this study that you'll probably know the stats more than me, and I think the numbers were like really shockingly different between the men and the women that took part.
Okay.
But basically it was, it asked people, would you rather sit alone with your thoughts for a certain period of time or get an electric shock? And I can't remember the numbers were, but like the men, basically, majority of the men chose an electric shock.
Really? They need to meet my dad. So my dad's never had a phone. The man's just doing life.
That's so cool.
We get a flight and he just sits there. He just sits there with his thoughts.
So he's never had a phone?
Never had a phone. He's got an iPad.
Okay.
I get emails like once in a blue moon. He doesn't spend that much time on it. And he just, we sort of, we do a trip every year to Mallorca and he'll sit there for that 2-hour flight and he's just, everyone's like, calls it like raw dogging a flight. And I'm like, my dad's been doing that for however many years he's been doing that, 70 years. He's just been like, he just does it.
That's
and he's
so cool.
he's always alone with his thoughts.
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, I'd always be like, I'm bored. He'd be like, you can't, he's like, you're not bored. He's like, just, go and sit and think.
Yeah.
So maybe we should get him on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going back to the kind of process, I guess, so if someone's started to speak more positively to themselves, work on kind of how they talk to themselves and treat themselves and getting really clear about what they want and speaking about it, what are the steps in terms of like actually forming habits and sticking to them? Because I think a lot of us, and I spoke recently in an episode about like vision boarding, and we start January and it's like, I'm going to be this superwoman or superman.
Yeah.
And the reality is you get to this sort of time, March, April, and then all of a sudden you look at your list and you think, oh, I've not achieved any of that.
Yeah.
How can you advise people, I guess, in terms of like, how do you actually take those steps and then stick to them, which is the most important part?
Okay, so I think there's a few things to this. We'll start with the most important thing, which is that we tend to work against our brains, not with them. In order to work with your brain, you're never going to just sort of cut all of your negative habits, and you're also not going to add a list of 20 things into your day. That's not going to happen. So let's just like forget about that for a second. New Year's resolutions, I don't have a problem with. I just think they're done wrong. I think they're sort of, we have this idea that we have to have a list of goals that like, I couldn't tell you what was on my list of New Year's resolutions from 4 or 5 years ago. Could you?
No.
Exactly. So I always kind of say, we can't, it's too much for our brain. Our brain expands around 20% of our energy every single day. By the time you get to the evening, your brain has sort of worked overtime, and there's this thing known as cognitive fatigue. So by the time you've got to the evening, your brain's thinking like, oh my God, I've had to think about the habits that I've added in. I've had to think about, what I'm eating, what I'm going to wear. I've had meetings. I've then had to have a phone call, and then this has gone wrong. This has happened with my child or my parent or this, whatever it is. That by the time we get to the evening, we kind of think, oh God, I'm just going to stick on, I'm just going to stick in a quick meal to the microwave, or I'm just going to order in, I'm just going to do that. Now, if you think about that in terms of sort of the year, yeah, you might be able to rely on willpower and motivation alone for a few weeks, maybe even a couple of months, depending on the personality type that you are. But if you're trying to do too much and cutting things out, your brain ultimately, when it gets to cognitive fatigue, is going to default to what it's always done. That's why we sort of like, sometimes we think, I wasn't even aware of the fact that I didn't do that. So instead of having New Year's resolutions or writing yourself a really lofty list of goals, I tell people, okay, think about, brain dump who it is you want to be. A vision board of sorts, right? Brain dump who it is you want to be, down to, what do they look like? How do they walk? How do they talk? What's their job? How much money are they earning? Everything that you can imagine about this person. Now, I want you to look at all of that. And when you're doing that, I want you to really emotionally connect to it. Why do I want that? How is that going to feel? What am I going to feel when I get that? Do I actually want that, or do I just think I want that? Then I want you to look at that in a sort of, from a zoomed out lens and think, what word encompasses all of that? Is it growth? Is it peace? Is it optimization? My word for last year was optimize. My word for this year is growth. What that word acts as is a filter. Now, I can tell you my word from last year and I can tell you my word from this year. Can't tell you the list of goals. You're going to remember that word, and I'll probably remember my words for the next few years, right? What that word acts as is a filter through which for you to make decisions every day. And I'm talking down to micro habits. I'm waking up in the morning. Am I snoozing my alarm? Is that going to help me with growth? Probably not. Then I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do now? Am I going to scroll on my phone? Am I going to listen to my affirmations just for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is, which is going to help me with growth? It acts as a filter through which for you to make decisions. Whatever that word is, whatever suits you, doesn't have to be growth. It can be whatever you want it to be. It could just be happiness, could be peace, could be calm, whatever is relevant to that person that you want to be. And that is going to act as a filter through which you can make the decisions, because life comes out of left field. Like, I know this, I have a mother who unfortunately is incredibly sick, and that came out of nowhere. And that means that every so often, my day is sidetracked by something. And that's, that's out of anybody's control. That is a stress that I cannot control. What I can control is not putting too much on myself of, okay, every day I'm going to do an hour-long workout. And every day I'm going to eat perfectly. And this is the meal I'm going to eat on Monday. And this is the meal I'm going to eat on Tuesday, because life happens. So when life does happen and something bad happens or something stressful happens, or you've got to pivot, what can I do today that still aligns with that word to get me 0.1% closer to where I want to be? And it starts to act as that filtering system, because a word is adaptable to seasons, to changes, to things that come out of left field. That word is adaptable. You can still live according to that word. What's one thing I can do for growth today? Is it writing one thing in my gratitude journal? Is it drinking a glass of water? Is it doing 100 more steps than yesterday? Is it just not snoozing my alarm? Is it getting up and showering? And what that tells your brain is we're still on track. Because when you tell yourself, you set these really rigid, strict goals, which is how New Year's resolutions have kind of been done since I can remember, certainly. When you fall off track, which you will, if you set yourself too many goals, you will. It's just how the brain works. It's how life works, because shit happens, like stuff happens, stuff comes out of left field. And when you fall off, you tell yourself, okay, I failed. And I think that is the sort of first thing I would do, would be to have that word to sort of filter through. The next thing I would say is that you're not going to just immediately get rid of bad habits, right? So how can I stack something good onto an existing habit, Or how can I replace that habit? Okay, you might be having your coffee before you eat, before you work out, whatever. There's a lot of chat around when you should have coffee and should you have milk in it and should you have this, should you have that? Okay, fine. When you're waiting for your coffee to brew, could you listen to your affirmations? Could you write down 3 things you're grateful for? Could you have your supplements next to it? Setting up your environment for success. You've got to work with your brain. You can't undo years worth of bad habits, and I'm saying bad in quote because what's a bad habit? What's a good habit? Your brain doesn't know. Like I said earlier, it knows need. So if you've always done that, you're not going to suddenly overnight just stop doing it. You need to work with your brain. You need to either slowly replace it, habit stack on something good, and in that sustainable, slow, and it takes time. I say to people, look, if you really want to change your life, it's going to take time. Unless you are one of those people, using my dad as an example again, who can just cold turkey, like he smoked till he was 60 and then just quit. He's just that kind of person. Not everybody is going to be like that, and not using smoking or anything as an example, but let's just say, you're someone that, doesn't eat protein in the morning, or somebody, you want to add these habits in. It's not that you're suddenly just going to switch everything up, and we're always taking things away. Sometimes it's about adding things in, and then you can think about, okay, well, I've actually replaced that habit. Now I can sort of actually move away from that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just about being really gentle with yourself, taking that time. But I think having that word, when an opportunity comes to me now, and I think, okay, have I got the time for it? Have I got the energy? But more importantly, does it align with the fact that growth is the overarching word for my year?
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it.
That's such an interesting way of looking at it, because filtering decisions is ultimately one of the key things when it comes to building habits and making good decisions over bad ones.
Yep.
So I really love that, because there's this whole thing of decision fatigue, like you were saying about cognitive fatigue. Is that what you said?
Yeah, cognitive decision fatigue, like that. That sort of, it's why I always say to people, set yourself up for success within your environment. You know, pack your bag the night before, get your clothes ready the night before, meal prep on a Sunday when you have the time, when you have the energy to do it, when you've not been at work all day, because by the time you've been at work all day and you've had a really annoying email or an annoying call and, you know, I can't figure out what I'm going to wear or whatever it is, the less decisions that you have to make, the less you sort of have that decision fatigue throughout the day, the more likely you are to be able to stick to the things that you want to do, because your energy can go to, no, you know, we said we were going to go to the gym after work, or no, we're going to make that, you know, delicious meal that we saved on Instagram that we said that we were going to make. We're not just going to order in. You haven't sort of tired yourself out by, you know, even just having a clean environment.
Yeah.
You know, even by cleaning up your digital environment. What are you consuming? Is that exhausting you? Is that comparison exhausting you?
Yeah. I did that yesterday, actually. Yeah. I did a massive unfollow on Instagram.
Hope I wasn't unfollowed.
No. Still on the list. Well, I followed loads of people because I think through work.
Yeah,
you know,
you do.
You have to follow loads of things.
I'm pretty savage with it these days.
Honestly.
You have to be.
And I saw these accounts and I was like, these do not relate to what I'm interested or the kind of person that I am now.
And there's something so to that. You've got to curate your digital environment. It's as important in 2026 as your physical environment, because what you're consuming is informing how you feel and how you think and what you're learning. It's really informing you in ways that you don't even know. And I'm not saying, you know, you just have to follow really educational. It can be entertainment because, you know, sometimes you have had a really bad day and seeing a video of like a kitten or like just something that really makes you barely laugh, that is going to switch up your mood. Like but it's important for social media to feel like a space where, yes, you can learn, yes, you can be educated, yes, you can be informed, but also that it's not overwhelming you. And I think that's where the fine line is. You know, if it starts to overwhelm you, that's tricky.
And you've spoken before about no 0 days.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So people always say to me, that's sort of like, what do you mean? You know, I think people get quiet and I'm like, no, let me just explain what this means. So I hate cheat days. Like, I hate the word cheat days. I'm just like, what even is a cheat day? Like, if I want something, I'm like having it. You know what I mean? I think I just always want to scrap that. A 0 day would be a day where you did not do one singular thing that took you a step towards where you want to be, to the person that you want to be. Now, that isn't running a marathon, right? Or like, you know, writing 1,000 Substack articles or filming all your content or doing it. No. If all you can manage that day is writing down one thing you're grateful for, if all you can manage that day is like a gentle stretch or, you know, prepping a meal for the week or just planning what you're going to, you know, eat, whatever it is, that's a no 0 day, you know, and it takes the pressure off of being perfect and ticking all these sort of lofty goals off. I think just, you know, a day where you don't move, you know, a fraction of a step closer to where you want to be through whatever that is. And what people don't realize is, you know, they think, well, what's that? You know, what's that going to do? So much more than you think, because your brain can't differentiate between something big and small. It just knows repeated, for better or for worse. So if you're getting into your workout kit, rolling out the mat and doing a stretch, you are building the neurological pathway towards moving your body every day. You're repeating the habit. Doesn't care if you've done an hour-long sweaty workout or not. You're doing it. You're getting into the habit of it. So a no 0 day is sort of that idea, you know, that James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits of the compound effect. Yes, isolated, that might not make a difference, but doing it every day, that could make a huge difference.
Yeah. And that's what makes it actually stick, right?
100%.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's just, people say to me, what's your number one tip? What did you do? I think there's nothing crazy. Just consistency, just every day, showing up imperfectly, showing up on the days I don't really want to show up for 2 minutes, you know, whatever you can manage.
Hi, my loves. Just a quick pause to say if you're enjoying Wish I Knew, please, please, please hit the subscribe button and leave a quick rating or review. It really makes such a difference to the show and helps us to keep bringing you amazing guests and stories. Now, let's get back to the episode. I think as well, like, there's so much in just getting it done.
Yeah.
And
done is better than perfect.
100%.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Well, I think as well, when you were talking earlier about like you're making your coffee in the morning, you've got 2 minutes to spare, like the time is going to pass anyway. And I think when it comes to meditation or affirmations, I used to think like, you know, I remember in lockdown, God, that feels like a long time ago.
6 years ago.
Honestly. But I would like wake up, I'd put on my 10-minute daily calm. I'd like go and sit in a specific spot.
You were doing it in lockdown.
I was doing it. I mean,
that was when I was not doing it.
Lockdown, I was like on
you were
great
thriving.
form.
Yeah, I was not.
I was one of the like very few people I feel like that were actually just like locking in. I think it was like a control thing though, of like everything else was out of control, and that was what I could.
Having a gin and tonic every day and like just eating whatever. I was
having
like,
fun.
I was just I was with my parents, so like not that much fun, but you know, it was nice.
But like that now is just not realistic with my day-to-day life.
Of course.
So what's the answer? I don't do it, you know? And I think you've broken it down so perfectly in the sense of like, rather than doing a 10-minute full-on meditation
what
in
if
your
you just play
meditation
calm
corner?
while you're brushing your teeth?
Yeah.
Like you're doing it anyway. The time is going to pass anyway. And, you know, I'm fully aware that people have very different schedules and do not necessarily have the time to do that. And you've put that so perfectly. Like we don't have the time, unfortunately, to sort of put these rituals aside and, you know, do all that. And every day, certainly for me, and I'm sure for you, looks very different. You know, my schedule and my timing every day is super different. So fitting it in where you can is better than trying to do it perfectly.
Yeah. And so talking about small habits, what are some of the small habits that have worked best for you?
Great question. The affirmations in the morning have been life-changing. Just in the way that I speak to myself, in the way I speak about myself, in the way that I respond to things in daily life, in the way that I'm just calmer. I visualize every night before I go to sleep, whether that's listening to something or just sort of in my mind thinking about where I want to go, just sort of build that image within my mind so that when opportunities come, my brain's like, yeah, we've done that before. And I think, gosh, what else? I think prioritizing movement's been a really big one for me in however that looks. I think showing up imperfectly or whatever it is. I think I'm someone that needs to sort of get that energy out first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
That's really important for me, whether that's weight training, Pilates class, or just a walk. Just for me, I have a tendency to be quite lazy, which people are always like, what do you mean? I'm like, innately, I've actually probably veered towards slightly lazier, like certainly physically. I was never very sporty. I never sort of moved a lot. It's something I've really had to train myself to do and work on. So not giving myself, you know, there's that Mel Robbins 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 where you sort of override that internal dialogue of, well, we could not do that because of this, or we could not do that because of this. Not giving yourself the opportunity to have that internal debate, just doing it. You know, even like this morning I went to a Pilates class and I was sort of in there and I was like, I don't feel good today. I was like, this is not some of my best work, but I was there. I was doing it. I was showing up. It's done now, you know? And I think just for my mind, that's better than if I just sort of decided, like, can't be bothered today.
I'll snooze or whatever.
Yeah, not snoozing my alarm. I think having really intentional screen-free time, especially with what I do, it's, you know, social media is one of those industries where in very few other industries can you publicly see and compare numbers and performance. You know, that can be really tough, sort of thinking like, you know, I put so much into this, why is this not? So I think getting off of social media as much as I can. I love social media. Like I love my job. I love what I do, but I think learning, you know, to not compare and just sort of, that's been another one for sure.
Or like place all your value on the metrics or whatever that might be.
Absolutely.
And I think I resonate with that so much, especially with classes, because I feel like if I book a class, I'm going to go. Otherwise you lose money.
Yeah.
If I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym in the morning and then I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Like for me, it doesn't really happen.
It doesn't happen. And I think holding yourself accountable, you know, having an accountability partner in the beginning was really important for me when I was starting to once a week go to a workout class on a Saturday, and it meant that, okay, like I'm not going to go out late on the Friday because, I've said to a friend I'm going to be there. And if showing up for a friend is easier for you than showing up for yourself in the beginning, then absolutely do that. Use that, accountability partner. And just to add on to the daily habits, gratitude practice is immensely important for me. And that doesn't have to be, I think people sort of don't do it because they think they need to write pages and pages and pages. Sometimes I just write a word. Sometimes I just, will write the same thing every day. I'm grateful for my health.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for my partner. I'm grateful for my friends. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be, it's for you. I had someone say to me once, I've actually had someone say this to me more than once. Multiple people have said to me, oh, but I write the same thing every day. And I'm thinking, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
How amazing that you get to be grateful for the same thing every day. How amazing to still be grateful for your health. How amazing to still be grateful for your family. How amazing to be in a position where you can write that you're grateful for those same things every single day. And I think there's a kind of beauty in that. I think finding beauty in the everyday and finding beauty in the mundane, because that you have that habit of gratitude practice, it sort of allows your brain to scan for those things, because it's thinking, well, I write my gratitude every morning or every evening or whenever you do it. So, let's look out for something today to be grateful for.
Yeah. What a privilege.
What a privilege.
And so you've previously said self-care isn't a face mask.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
So I think there's a difference between look, we all love a face mask. And we all love to sort of do those, have those moments of calm, those pockets of peace. But true self-care comes from the way that you speak to yourself, because ultimately the way that you experience life and the way that you move through life is going to be informed by how you speak to and about yourself through that self-concept. So for me, true self-care, caring for yourself as you do for others, is by speaking to yourself and treating yourself as you would others in that incredibly kind way. I did a post the other day where I said, if you spoke to your best friend the way that you spoke to yourself, would you still be friends? And that's just something to think about. There's not necessarily an answer to that question. That's just something to have a think about. And, when I would think about, okay, I want to change my life, I want to switch it up, sometimes I would just, give myself a compliment or, make myself a really nice meal, almost like I was someone I was trying to impress.
Yeah.
It sounds really weird, but just caring for yourself in that way teaches you that you are worthy to be cared for, teaches you that you are worthy of love, that you are worthy of opportunity. And it's just, it rewires your brain. It's biological, it's science. And the face mask is nice. We all love it, but it's not rewiring your brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a nice thing to do.
It's a nice thing to do, but it doesn't move the needle.
I mean, it's hard because giving yourself the time to sort of sit and have that moment of self-care, whether that is looking after your skin or having a bath or whatever it is, that's important too, because it shows you that you're worthy of that rest and you're deserving of that moment of sort of self-love. But I think true self-care and caring for yourself is not as simple as doing a face mask.
Sort of treating yourself with
Yeah.
care and respect, right?
Yeah. It's a nice thing to do.
And it's so interesting because a lot of what you've spoken about is very basic, simple
Yes.
stuff in the sense of we all know it, but we don't do it.
Yeah.
And so something that came to mind when you were speaking just then is around children and how we treat children. So I've got a stepson who's 5, and you want to fill them with love and kind words and respect, and you want to treat them really nicely, and you want them to be happy. And also you notice the difference with kids of when they're on their great form and when they're having a terrible day. And often if they're having a terrible day, it might be because the fact they didn't sleep well last night, or they didn't, they had too much sugar. And so it's so funny because as adults,
you note that with them, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And we overcomplicate it so much.
We do. And I think there's this great book I was reading, and it speaks about, it's so basic, but if you left the house in the middle of December wearing a tank top, you're going to feel cold. Now, you're going to feel cold because it's December, it's cold out, and you're not wearing a jumper, like you're not dressed appropriately. You know, we sort of equate these things. Okay, well, I feel cold because of X, Y, Z. Now, if you feel sad or anxious or stressed, we very rarely sort of like take a look at what environmental factors that might be from. Now, there's two kinds of stressors, two main kinds. Things we can control, and I'm really simplifying this, but things we can control and things we can't control. There are things we can't control, and those are things sort of external to us. Those are things going on within the world or that directly impact us, like a family member getting sick or, you know, anything like that, which I've, you know, on a personal level had to deal with for the last 5 years. There's things we can control, right? There's stresses that we can control within our lives. We can control getting off our phone and getting enough sleep. We can control, have I drank enough water? We can control those choices that we make. We can control, how am I waking up in the morning? Am I waking up in the morning to a sort of blaring alarm that's kind of jolting me awake in a really horrible way? And then, oh gosh, well, you know, actually I've snoozed my alarm X amount of times. I've missed my workout class. I don't know what I'm going to wear. Oh God, that's in the wash. You know, I didn't note the train times. Oh my, you know, we're sort of, there's these things that are, there's these stresses that we sort of can control. And when I was doing my podcast, I had Alice Law come on, who co-wrote a book with Mo Gawdat on stress. And she spoke about, she said, you know, I just have a really soothing alarm tone to wake me up. Really simple. And now me and my fiance have the same alarm tone. It's just like, it sounds like a bird song. And whenever I speak about it, someone's always like, yes, I have that same one. And it's almost like a funny noise to where when it plays, me and him are kind of like, like, I don't know, like it just wakes us up in a really nice, calm way. So you're starting the day in that way. And, you know, I've laid out my clothes and I've set my alarm slightly earlier because, you know, I want to have that time to sort of be slow and intentional with my morning. And I've made a note of what time I need to leave the house, and I'm going to stick to that. And, you know, I've got time to sort of make myself a hot drink that I'm going to bring with me. And I've washed my cup the night before so that I'm not like, oh my God, I haven't got my Keat cup. You know, there are things we can control and there are things we can't control. And I think just taking charge of the things that you can control, because if I ever feel sometimes I feel really sad and really low because of what's going on with my mum. And I ride that wave, you know, I cry that out. I really feel that. But if I'm feeling really like anxious because, so for example, I gave up drinking coffee last January, so a year and a bit ago. I've also stopped drinking alcohol for the time being, just because I noticed when I drank, which wasn't very often, but when I did, if I had a glass of wine, I just felt anxious the next day. And I thought, okay, well, that's something I can control. You know, I'd rather not feel that, you know. Have I had enough sleep? Have I eaten enough, really? You know, have I drank enough water? Did I move my body today? And it's all these things, you know, like with, you know, if you had a baby or a young child, you know, what have you eaten? Have you eaten? You know, and we forget to sort of check in with ourselves on that. And I think when you don't check in with yourself, you're sort of thinking, you can get really stressed by the stress. Why am I feeling so sad? Why am I feeling so anxious? And if you're sort of ticking off all of those boxes, then maybe it's something to think about. Okay, well, maybe something else is going on. Maybe something is off balance, or maybe there is something going on in my life that I need to talk out and I need to deal with that I actually can't control. But first and foremost, looking at those sort of tick boxes of, well, actually, you know, have I eaten today?
Yeah.
Have I hydrated myself? You know, did I have a sort of triple shot of espresso before I ate something? You know, I think just being a little bit mindful of that.
Yeah.
You know, did I set myself up for success? You know, was I scrolling till late? Did I sort of, you know, I'll do the washing later and then, oh my God, I've got nothing to wear to this big meeting, or I haven't ironed my shirt, or whatever it is. You know, I think just setting yourself up for success in that way.
Yeah, it's such a good point. Okay, so moving into quickfire wrap.
Yes.
What tools or apps would you recommend to start with building confidence or sticking to habits?
Great question. I don't know about apps per se. I think with apps, I would say maybe curate your apps. I think curate the apps that you are already on to be a place that helps you with confidence, whether that's following accounts that lift you up, whether that's following accounts that educate you, whether that's following accounts that just make you belly laugh and make you feel really good if you're going to be on the apps. I think in terms of habits, I would say, please, 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 just try the affirmations. Just try it once.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a playlist if anybody wants that playlist.
Oh yeah, let's drop the playlist in.
Yeah.
What do you feel about journaling?
I love it. But it doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be a gorgeous Substack article, and it doesn't have to be a sort of literary, marvel. It can be as simple as, I have a note in my phone that just says good things happen to me every day.
Oh, I love that.
And, I'll probably put, I did this amazing podcast, today it'll be that. And, it might be I had a coffee with a friend, or I had a really lovely phone call. One of my best friends has moved to Australia, and there's lots of things to be grateful for today. And, at 6 a.m. when I was on my walk this morning, I was like, you free? And we had a call, so I'm grateful for that today. I think just starting to really pick up on things, with journaling, you don't need the perfect journal. You don't need it. You could write it on a Post-it note or a scrap piece of paper, if that works for you, and then you don't have to keep it. You can throw it away. You can just sort of, whatever it is that you want to do. But yeah, I think it's really, I would say it's a fundamental.
I notice such a difference in myself when I journal.
Same.
Versus when I don't. And there's actually a really interesting book when I was kind of in between leaving my corporate job and then starting freelance. Loads of people recommended this book called The Artist's Way. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And it's just this amazing, it's like a workbook journal where basically you've got different tasks every week, and I think it's like a 12-week course. I didn't complete the 12 weeks, so I want to go back and do it again. But basically, one of the key consistent habits is that you have to do 3 pages every single day. And that is like a 3-page brain dump. No one ever sees it, but you're basically like just decluttering your brain.
So important.
Of everything that's in it. And you notice such a difference when you start to do that consistently. You first start to do it, and 3 pages is actually quite a lot.
Yeah.
So you're like really struggling to think of what do I write. And then after sort of week 1, week 2, you're just flowing.
Yeah. I do this exercise whenever I do an event where we write a letter to our future selves. And I'm always really pleasantly surprised by how much people write. I think they kind of think, well, what the hell am I going to write? It's a bit like when I go into therapy every week, I'm like, don't have anything to talk about today. And that hour is always filled.
Yeah.
That hour is always filled.
Where's the time gone? What's a belief that you had to unlearn?
Oh, great question. That your self-worth is in any way defined by what you look like. It's not.
Love that.
Yeah, it's not.
Best book recommendation? I feel like we've dropped quite a lot.
Yeah, dropped quite a lot. I think Atomic Habits is like the one that I always go back to. It's the book I read at the beginning of my journey, and one that I really love. There's 2 I really love by this author. It's Brianna Wiest. And the first is The Mountain Is You. And the second is 101 Essays to Change the Way You Think. If you're not a huge reader, like you just want to sort of dip your toe in and out, 101 Essays to Change the Way You Think is great because it's 101 essays. So they're sort of short essays. Some are much shorter than others. And you can really dip in and out depending on what you need that day. It's your sort of go-to for, one of the things might be 12 things you think are going wrong in your life that actually aren't, or 20 things to be grateful for today. And it just is a real perspective shifter. Yeah.
Okay. I really want to get that now.
Yeah, it's great.
Biggest wellness myth?
There are so many. There are so many. I think for me, the biggest wellness myth is the idea that in order to do wellness or be well or be healthy or sort of, feel good and look good, the idea that you have to have the perfect workout set or the perfect water bottle or the perfect trainers or the perfect this. Okay, if you're running an ultramarathon, yes, there's probably a specific trainer that you need and like kit that you need. But if you just want to be generally more well, feel healthier, look a little bit better, feel a bit more confident. My friend Bryony has this incredible app, Pilates by Bryony. And I always say to her, I'm like, sometimes I'm doing that workout video in like my like old pajama set. And that I'm showing up in that way. Like it doesn't need to be perfectly curated. It doesn't need to be what you're seeing on Instagram. I think it's just show up as you are and sort of do those habits. Yeah. So I think the biggest wellness myth would be that you need to buy a million things and look a certain way before you can show up within that space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really love that. And I so relate to that as well. Because it's like, oh, I'm going to start doing Pilates, but first I need to go buy a whole
Yeah,
bunch of
I'm going
new
to start doing
stats.
Pilates, but first of all, I need to look a certain way. Second of all, I need to wear a certain set and show up wearing this and with my hair done like this. And, and it's like actually, in lockdown, when I sort of started to think about what I wanted to do, I was, using my dad's like mat that he had from when he was doing physio from an operation, this like old, like squidgy mat that he'd like bought God knows where. And, I was just like doing a little free YouTube workout. I just, I was on my phone or my laptop and looking at like, okay, 10-minute abs or 10-minute arms or 10-minute whatever it was. And I think I had some like dumbbells off Amazon that cost me like £20. I think it's like, it doesn't have to look. I think it's the idea that like in order for it to matter, you've got to post about it or it's got to look a certain way and it doesn't.
I think there's also this element of like, sometimes we trick our minds or our minds trick us in the sense of like, you have to buy motivation.
And because marketing works.
Yeah.
It works, and then I forget his name. It'll come to me and what's his name? You might know the guy that always talks about like the psychology of marketing. His name's escaped me. I'm going to like be lying in bed later and I'm going to tell you and we'll have like the word on his name on the screen. But I always say I'm a marketer's dream because I can be so easily sold to these quick,
Same.
and I have to really check myself. And when you start to really read up about the psychology of marketing and how it works and how it appeals to your emotional center within your brain, it is fascinating. And that's why, the wellness industry tells you, and the way we live now is such, consumerism tells you need all of these things to be that person, to have that life, to look like the model that's wearing the thing. And it's like, actually, you don't need that. But I also fall victim to it. So it's like, and we all do, of course we all do.
Well, it's interesting. I always feel like when I was maybe the most consistent with workouts, I was using like a kind of semi-grotty, cheaper gym or like home workout sets like in lockdown. Whereas sometimes like, again, I get tricked into the fact that like I've just joined this new third space and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the gym more when I have a really nice gym.
No, I do it. I do it still now. Like I said to my fiance the other day, I was like, I think I need a new workout set just to get me a bit more motivated. And then I'm like, Izzy, you don't need any of that. Like you just need to show up, and if you can, like I was saying before we started recording, it's that, I'm walking through the rain to get to the class because, showing up in that sort of imperfect way where it's like, hope I don't bump into anyone because I look, whatever, but it doesn't matter. No. Just showing up for you. You don't have to be in a specific workout set of any description.
A quote or mindset you live by?
Ooh, a quote or mindset I live by? It's so cheesy and it's so overdone. And actually I was at a talk the other day and someone said this quote and she said, I know this is really cliche and overdone. And I was like, it's my favorite quote, is that thing of nothing changes if nothing changes. If you keep doing the same thing, if you read the same chapter of a book, the ending isn't going to change. So if you want to make change, you've got to make it. But also I always tell myself if I'm ever feeling really uncomfortable or if I'm ever feeling like I'm sort of like, Izzy, you're on the edge of something here. You're on the edge of a shift and change is good. So I think that, but also just, I think just that, nothing changes if nothing changes.
I love that.
It's on the back of my phone.
Really?
Yeah. I know when she said it, she was like, this is so cliche. I like hit my phone. I was like, but I so believe it, and I said it to a friend the other day. It was a bit one of those like sort of harsh conversations, she's talking about finding a partner. And I was like, but you're not doing anything different to what you've ever done. And she was like, you're right, I'm not. I think you've got to switch it up.
You do. And you can only grow and learn if you
keep moving.
Changing. And then I've got one final closing question. What's one question or journal prompt someone can ask themselves today to start becoming more confident?
How would I show up tomorrow if I knew that the answer was yes? What would I do tomorrow if I knew the answer was yes? And that comes from Reese, who I did the Yes Supply coaching certification to get my mindset coaching certification. And that was how they opened it. You know, what would you do if the answer was yes? You knew the answer was going to be yes. And I think moving through life with the assumption that the answer will be yes, I think, you know, and really thinking, okay, if I knew I could, what would I ask for? You know, what opportunity would I ask for? Would I go for if I knew the answer was going to be yes?
I love that. I'm absolutely going to start using that. Izzy, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I could talk forever.
Honestly, I could talk to you forever. I feel like I've learned so much. And I also feel like everyone who is listening will hopefully have their pens and papers and their journals ready, because I just feel like everything you talk about is so simple in the sense of it's broken down in a way that's digestible and actionable, but also just coming from a really relatable place of you don't have to be a superhuman in order to kind of be the best version of yourself. You can actually just show up and take really small steps every single day.
Yeah, 100%. None of us are perfect. And I think if we were perfect, we'd have nowhere to go. So
yeah,
just bear that in mind always.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.